Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. You know how these things go. We wanted to open up the room before we get started. So we'll get started in about a minute or two. Welcome. Come on in and get settled. We'll get started right at the top of the hour. Pardon me. I'm just checking my notes on something. I've got about a minute out. We'll get started in just a couple seconds here. All right. My watch shows top of the hour. So Amanda, Elena, Carol, y'all ready to go?
We're ready to go.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gene Kerns. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Academic Officer at Renaissance, and I'm joined today by my awesome colleague, Dr. Carol Johnson, and we are here today to share with you practical tools. And we use that word very specifically, practical tools for differentiating, because the reality of it is it's got to be practical. We have to have things that we can fold in, things that we can do. And we're going to focus on practical tools for differentiating in the space of early literacy. So that is our focus for today. General housekeeping kind of stuff. I mean, I think the one great thing post-pandemic is most people are pretty comfortable with all the platforms there are. So you probably know where all the buttons are. You can do everything you need to do. But the questions that always come up are, yes, there will be a recording, and yes, you will get all the slides. So there'll be that traditional follow-up email that will have the link to the recording, the link to all the slides. We'll put in some links while we're going live here today. Grab them if you can, if you want, and those links will be in the follow-up email as well. So in the nature of time, let's go ahead and get started. Now, we use the term differentiation in the headline and in the title for the event. And, you know, that's very synonymous with sometimes for folks, it's individualization or personalization or personalized learning. Our intention today is to not spend much of any time in drilling into, well, what's the difference between personalization or differentiation or individualization? Because you could literally spend 2 hours just trying to get those definitions straight in the literature and in your head. So that is not our intention today. So we use the word in the title, differentiation. You might even see personalization on some of the slides. Here's what matters the most. Whatever you call it, whatever you're trying to do, you know that it is the opposite of this, okay? So there's that whole narrative that much of public schooling was built upon a factory model. And, you know, there's some truth there, because about the same time that we were moving masses of individuals into public schooling systems in our country, the factory model was transforming the world. So very innocently, people of that time took the ideas from the factory model and wove them into schools, okay? And we often have this narrative that people say, you know, schools are built on a factory model. Well, you know, there's something that we need to acknowledge. Well, first of all, this was an interesting one. First of all, I got, well, where are the girls? They're not there. The only female in the room is the person in the back. There's one lady back there. Well, that's another social conversation there. But here's what we need to acknowledge about the factory model. It never really existed. Because even when schools were run in much more regimented ways than they are today, teachers have always sought to respond to the needs that kids have. Anytime we answer a question, anytime we try to go back and reteach something, anytime we try to redirect or say it another way, anytime that we fed a hungry child breakfast before school started, that wasn't a factory model. Machines of a factory do not respond to their raw materials. But teachers have always sought to respond to the needs of their students. The problem is there was only so far they can go because time did march on. So at a certain point during the day, we needed to move on. At a certain point towards the end of the day, you needed to shut off the lights and go home because you just had given everything that you could. But I believe that deep, deep in their hearts, every teacher wants to respond as much as they can practically. And that's why we use the term practical in the headline. Respond as much as they can practically. And the reality of it is we can do more now than we could do, especially 100 years ago, when it looked much more like a factory because technology has changed so much. So our goal today is to dive into this, to give you some practical tools and to really maybe update you about some of the offerings that we have, things that you can now do that you couldn't even do a year ago using some of the tools from Renaissance. And I believe that when you see them, you will say, that's something I can latch onto, and that's something I can do that will allow me to respond to my kids' needs even more. Okay. And this idea of differentiating, responding to kids, it's at the heart of our mission. The Renaissance mission has always been to accelerate learning for all children. You accelerate learning when you're able to respond to kids' needs. When you're not able to respond to their needs, their learning is not going to be accelerated. So this is really cut from the very cloth of the mission that we have woven into what we do every single day. So now, before we dive deeply into this foundational reading space and the tools that we can help you there, I want to make sure that you're very, very clear about some of the dynamics around foundational reading. Now, we're going to focus again on foundational reading today. So kindergarten 1, 2, up into 3. We have 2 more events after this one. So today's topic is foundational reading. We're going to have another event on reading after the foundation is in place. So think basically 4th grade and up beyond there. And then we're going to have another event focused just in on mathematics. And I should explain Carol's role here too. I'm going to take it down the main highway for most kids. And then Carol's going to come in towards the end, and she's going to be in all the webinars and do the same thing. She's going to come in towards the end and say, but what do you need to think about or say and understand around teaching these skills to students who are emerging bilinguals or English language learners, whatever term you say, because that is a massive population of our kids now. And we need to understand how to respond to their needs as well. So we're going to talk about foundational reading today, and we have to acknowledge some of the unique dynamics of that space. This is an amazing study that was done by AIR, the American Institutes of Research, Jasmine Park over there. And I want to show you what they found, because what they found really frames this landscape so importantly for us. Now, what Jasmine and her colleagues did was they used a massive data set from the federal government called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study. And what they did was they tracked what growth looks like across kindergarten up through the end of 3rd grade. Okay, so they're looking at those first couple of years that we know are so formative. And if you say, well, what does growth typically look like? You see this line that is right here. Okay, so you see the scale score over on the side for this particular test. You see how kids did, but that was only the beginning of their analysis, because the first thing you always need to understand about averages or means, whatever term you want to use, is all kinds of other stuff can be hiding behind them. It's one thing to say, what's the average? It's another thing to say, what's the margin of error, or what's the standard deviation from that? So Jasmine and her colleagues applied a very interesting statistical model. And I know it's going to scare you, but it's actually a really simple thing. It's called the growth mixture model. And basically what the growth mixture model says is, if overall growth looks like this, are there different elements within it, different mixtures, if you will? Are there, within that overall cloud of all kids, are there groups of kids who are making their way through that differently? Okay. Now, if it's just random kids all over, you don't find anything. But if there are clusters of kids that move through those grades very similarly, that is what the growth mixture model picks up on. And what they found was 5 different growth trajectories, 5 different ways within the overall average that kids. So what I'm basically going to show you is these 5 pathways. Every kid basically that you serve is on one of these 5 different pathways. All right. So here they are. They're graphed here for you. It's really important to look at the table down at the bottom, because it explains what the name of that group was that they gave to them and what percentage of kids fall into there. So for example, that first group up there, those are the high performers. 5% of kids grow like that. They come into school well ahead, and they just are always way up there. They are just astronomical for them. And this actually matches what Nancy Young says in her reading ladder: learning to read is almost effortless. Okay, that's 5%. For the other 95% of it's work. Okay. Next group down, early boosters. They're called early boosters because they don't start as high, but look how they just rise really quickly. They're like off like a rocket ship. These are kids that when they get into school, they just flourish. They just take it in. That's about 20% of kids. The next group is what they classify as average learners. That's 52% of the population. Very close to that depiction of the mean or overall growth looks something like that. That's where most of us are. And then there's two more groups down at the bottom, the slow but steady learners. They call them that because they're always growing, but they're slow. They start behind and they grow more slowly. So over time, the gap between the highest performing kids and them tends to get wider and wider, a little bit of narrowing, but at a certain point, it just kind of stays there. And then there's about 3% of the population that are just flat out struggling readers. They start behind and they grow at the slowest rates possible. Now, when we look at this, I want to make sure that you understand that when they say average learners here, they've said nothing about proficiency. So when it comes to looking through the lens of your state test, these kids in the red line, they're golden, they're good, no problems there. These kids depicted by the green line, they are passing your state test. The purple line kids and the orange line kids are unquestionably not reaching proficiency on your state test. And when it comes to these blue kids, they are up and down along the proficiency line. Some of them are achieving proficiency, some of them are not. At the end of this analysis, one of the things they said was, look how far apart kids start and look how quickly things change over in these areas here. Basically, their analysis came down to an idea that helping kids get the very best early start possible, that's when we can make the biggest difference in kids' lives. Look at the citation here from Jewel, okay? The evidence in her sample, which is a different one from the one I just showed you, but it's all in the same space. Her analysis found that kids who are struggling by the end of first grade, they are still struggling in reading by the end of fourth grade. And guess what? I can find you 10 other studies that say if they're struggling there, they struggle for the rest of their lives, okay? What we've got to do is zone right in on the early grades, in particular, kindergarten and first grade to start the race. Because look at the pictures in the background. You can't afford to get late to the race. You can't afford to fall down in the first couple of steps. You have got to begin as best as possible, because if you stumble in these first couple of years, most kids never are able to pick themselves up and catch up in that race again. So that's the space that we're struggling in. Now, of course, the science of reading is sweeping the country. Many of you have probably seen this view of the illustration of what learning to read is. It's learning to decode and then being able to match the words that you can now decode and sound out to words that you've heard somewhere that you know already. And if you can do those two things, you get to reading comprehension. And I love what Emily Hanford said, which is the simple view is not reading is not trying to say that learning to read is simple. It's not. It's trying to tell us that learning is divided into two pieces. One is we have to learn the mechanics of all those letters and all those sounds. But then we've also got to know words. Ideally, I've heard them before, so that when I sound out a word, I go, oh, I know that. Like when Emily Hanford's son was reading aloud to her and said epitome. And she said, what? He said epitome, E-P-I-T-O-M-E. She said, oh, do you mean epitome? He said, oh, that's epitome. He already knew the word. He was just matching it all together. Closely related to the simple view of reading is Scarborough's rope. It looks far more complex, and it is because it gets more granular, but look at the two big parts. They're the same. You must build up the ability to recognize words by being aware of phonemes, knowing how to decode them. And then when you can do that, it also requires that you have knowledge of language. If we can build up these two capacities on kids, we'll have highly literate kids. And in the early grade space, we are talking very heavily about this kind of stuff. So let's talk about how we get that job done the best possible. Now, even though differentiation and personalization, they all sound like instruction, the first thing we need to acknowledge in this space is the journey to differentiation begins in assessment. because personalization or differentiation, again, whatever term you want to use, unless it's guided and informed by assessment, it will be at best a grossly inefficient process. So we need as much information about how kids are doing and where they are so that we can get them what we need, or what they need, excuse me, as fast as possible. So I want to make sure that you are aware of a new tool that we have from Renaissance, because this has been with us for less than a year. We have a brand new category of tool. We refer to it as a skill screener, in contrast with a general screener. Let me explain what I'm talking about. STAR Literacy, STAR Reading, STAR Math are FastBridge products. Those are all general screeners. And what I mean by that is they broadly survey all of literacy, meaning that they assess in a variety of domains. So I'm illustrating with STAR Literacy here, but the same would be true for FastBridge or STAR Reading or STAR Math, any of our general screening tools. They screen across multiple domains in whatever subject area that you are talking about. But within these domains, there's an area that is just super important in the first couple of years: phonics, okay? That's the heart of what we're teaching kids. So the concept of a skill screener is to say, let's not screen the entire domain. Let's focus in on the particular skills, phonics, that we really want to screen on, and only screen and work within that space. Why, of all the domains of literacy, why would phonics qualify to have a very special tool in that space? Because according to Moats and Tolman's research, these other areas aren't the primary cause of why many kids struggle. It's usually something over on the phonological deficit side. Massive numbers of struggling readers have deficits there. Going back to the race analogy, what it means is that they didn't start off well. Okay. Now, little character asked, or little qualification down here. This is research that is done just on monolingual students. So Carol's going to come and explain to you how this is different if you're talking about emerging bilinguals. So understand that what I'm saying right now is for kids who are native English speakers. For many of them, most of the problems they have in reading are rooted in not developing appropriate phonological processing abilities in the early grades. Okay. That's why we have a brand new tool called Star Phonics, and the logo explains what it is. Look at the I in phonics, a magnifying glass. Star Phonics is a tool that zooms right in and looks super closely at what? Just phonics. Just phonics. What does it do? It assesses how kids are doing on 102 different skills in 12 critical patterns or categories. So over on the right side there, you see the categories or patterns that Star Phonics assesses. Underneath those 12 categories are over 100 specific skills. So for example, let's just use R control vowels as a category. There's 5 skills underneath that: AR, IR, OR, UR, and I forgot whatever other vowel I didn't do in there. I was going fast. I should remember that kind of stuff. But you get the idea. There's the 5 vowels. So let's talk about how the 5 vowels are then controlled through R. Okay. So on the left, you see the categories. On the right, you see a sampling of those very specific skills. How does it work? The kid is given 3 nonsense words, and the teacher is given a scoring screen like this. So as a teacher, let me go back and start it again so you can see it more closely. The kid's given ter, bur, core. You mark whether they were able to pronounce that right or not. When you do that, at the end of the assessment, you'll get very specific information like red tiles saying, this is where the problems are. The white tiles are where they are doing okay, which allows that assessment to give you very specific guidance about what skills the kids are struggling with and what specific elements of those skills they are struggling with. Now, again, this is primarily K1, 2, 3, up into 5 is generally where most phonics skills are, but we have middle schools that are still using Star Phonics when they have kids that haven't finished it all. So in terms of what you're able to then do is you're able to get reports that look like this: red, yellow, and green, that let you know if you see red at the top, that's a skill lots of kids are struggling with. That's a great thing for a whole class lesson. When you see a skill, for example, right over here, there's a cluster of yellow kids, but there's a lot of kids in that same column who understand that skill. Well, then this skill right here is a really good one to do as a small group for these kids, because most of the skills before they have, it's just that next one they're struggling with. And then when you see kids that are coming up really down at the bottom, right down there, like they are struggling with everything, those are the kids that need you one-on-one. Dr. Michelle Hosp, University of Massachusetts Amherst, was the creator of this. And what she said was her goal was at the end of this assessment, she could answer the question the teachers always asked: what do I teach tomorrow? And that's what the goal of this assessment is. That brings us to our first poll. So let me launch that one for you. I'd like to know, what reading curriculum are you using? And we don't have them all here because that list would be too terribly long. We have some of the more popular ones, but what reading curriculum are you using for your students in K-3? See if you can find your curriculum right there. If not, there's an other option for you. I think we got the top 5 programs that are out there in the market right now. And so far, I haven't seen anybody say other. Give a couple seconds more for you to respond to that. All right, counting down. 5, 4, 3, no pressure, 2, 1. Let me cut that off. I think we've got a pretty good sampling here. Let me share the results with you. We have some folks that are using core knowledge language arts, CKLA for short. Foundations is there. Into Reading, McGraw-Hill's Wonders program. Here's why I asked you that question. One, I want to know what you're using, okay? And there's a lot of shift going on with the science of reading to make sure that people are using curricula that are targeted very specifically. The idea is there. But here's the beauty of that Star Phonics tool that I just show you. It doesn't matter what curriculum you use. For any curriculum out there, we can align the skills in the assessment so that they are placed in the order that you actually teach them, which allows you to see on a screen like this what skills have not yet been taught, what skills are we currently teaching, and what skills have we already taught. That's so important because nobody's concerned about kids not doing well on skills that you have not taught yet. It's these that are the most important. Look at that. Skills that in this school have been taught that students have not mastered. The curriculum is moving on, and look at every square there that is reflected by yellow or red. That's a kid that is stumbling in the first steps of this race. That's the kind of information we need, and we need it on phonics more than anything else. That's why we now have this skill screener. Will we build other ones? Maybe. Do we have any ideas right now? No. Again, why phonics? Because it's so important. If we get that right, everything else has a chance. And if we get that wrong, kids will never recover from that. Again, you can see the ones that are not taught, no concerns there. The ones that are being taught, that is helpful, but the meat is right there in the pink box. The skills that you have taught that kids have not closed out. That is critically important information, okay? Now we're done with the assessment piece, but I wanted you to understand that personalization without assessment is going to be grossly inefficient. That assessment would target you right in on who needs you for what. What can you do for the whole group? What can you do within small groups? What do you need to do one by one? But here's the next step, okay? The minute any assessment says, here's what a kid needs, any teacher worth their salt is going to say, do you have something that will help me there? And where can I go? What can I use? So we're going to spend the rest of our time today about what tools can you use when you find the problems that kids have. So remember I said that with Star Phonics, it's scored at an error level. So once you've given the skill or given the assessment to kids, you get very detailed information about exactly which, in this case, R control vowels kids are struggling with. You can see it skill by skill, and you get a report that says, look, for this kid, AR, ER, OR, and UR, and in most cases, it's at the end of the word. That's great information, okay? Well, let me show you what you could do with that. you could immediately springboard over into another new product from Renaissance, La Lilo. Okay. We've had this for a little bit over a year. Star Early Literacy, if you have it, will now place kids into La Lilo. La Lilo is a practice tool. Okay. So for kids to practice these skills, you see them down the side, the big five of the National Reading Panel Report: phonemic awareness, phonics. That's what Star Phonics is assessing: fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. This is the first tool that first practice tool that young children would encounter from Renaissance, and it's set up as a series of worlds, an adventure game for them to explore. So they explore different worlds, and as they're doing that, they're learning foundational skills. They have the chance to learn treasures and badges and unlock new stories and do new reading. For them, it's a big adventure game. One of my colleagues, Mike Flanagan, his daughter says to him, "Daddy, can I play La Lilo now?" Isn't that great? She wants to go play La Lilo because to her, it's an adventure. For him, it's kid by kid and skill by skill information about how they are doing. So the kids have an adventure world to explore. You get a record book that tells you against each of the skills that you're working with, who's doing well, green, who's struggling some, comes across a little bit as like orange on here, and who's really struggling a lot, it would be red, but my color screen didn't come through quite so well. You get the idea. And the beauty of La Lilo is there is a free version of La Lilo. So if you want to start playing with it this afternoon, you got an option out there to do that. And now is a great time to bring new stuff like this to try in right now, because let's be honest, it's February and the kids are bored. That you know them, they know you, and they're looking for something new. So if you want to pilot something, you are coming into the best part of the year to pilot things. But look at the beautiful connection. Let's suppose I use Starphonics and I figured out that Ava and Emily and Jaden are all struggling with R control vowels. I need something for them to do. So I go in, I choose their names. I choose the phonics category within La Lilo. I scroll down. I find R control vowels. And then I click the particular R control vowels that they were struggling with. And when I hit assign, what that does is the next time they log into La Lilo, now it's an adventure game, they're charting their own path. But what that does is it tells La Lilo, jump right to R control vowels right now for those kids and get them exactly what they need. It's as simple as that. Information from the assessment that moves into the practice program. Another practice program we have is Freckle. It includes all 4 content areas, but the most content is in there for math and English language arts. And adding more English language arts is our #1 priority in development right now. Freckle's the next step. La Lilo's the first practice tool that a child would see in literacy. Freckle then becomes the next one. And when La Lilo is fading out and Freckle goes online for them, Freckle will stay with them all the way through high school. There are over 700,000 teachers teaching 10 million kids across 75,000 schools that are currently using Freckle. And again, it goes all the way up through the grades. The interface changes. So even though you see JT the Pig sometimes, your high school kids are not going to see JT. Okay. It matures with them. The content grows with them as they make their way up. There are very early grades kind of things. So once they've gotten some mastery of skills in La Lilo, they can start using Freckle as well, because it too has things like word study, sight words, and decodables. But once kids become capable of more independent, more advanced reading, it is filled with differentiated articles, many on certain nonfiction topics, and all types of English language arts skill practice, like making connections, interpreting inferences, and all of those skill-based kinds of things that we ask kids to do in reading once they have learned the basics of it. It includes both targeted and adaptive practice. What do I mean by that? Adaptive is the kid logs in and they make their own journey through that. They kind of choose where they're going. Targeted is what we did a minute ago with La Lilo. I go in as a teacher and say, I want this kid to work on this skill next. So the next time they log on, guess what comes up? The skill that I just identified that they needed. Okay. Both of these are great things for kids to do. And I want to show you just a sample. Here is 3rd grade word study skills from Freckle. So by the time kids get to about 3rd grade, they're kind of transitioning off La Lilo and moving into Freckle. But look, there are their phonics skills that are so important. There's the, in this case, Freckle calls them R influence vowels, same thing as R control vowels, but it's all there. These most important skills and the skills that are woven into your standards, they are in there. And these programs allow the kids to practice. Freckle's been out longer than La Lilo, so it's already gone through the Digital Promise Review, and they favorably discuss the way it was designed based on very good research about what online tools and technology should do. So we're very, very proud of that. We also had a recent analysis that came out that showed some very nice outcomes for students that use Freckle in the right way for multiple seasons. What we began to see is higher percentages of kids making it over the critical 40th percentile benchmark. In other words, when these schools implemented Freckle within a year of using it well, their pass rates went up between 8.6 to 10.5% in terms of proficiency. So increased pass rates, which of course is the metric we're going to be evaluated on. That brings us to our next poll here. Let me go back and get the right one and launch that for you. This is the last part for me, and then Carol's going to talk about our emerging bilinguals. But let me just poll you very quickly. I want to know, do you use STAR in your district, or perhaps you use FastBridge? And for those of you that are not aware, Renaissance merged and is now working with Illuminate Education. So FastBridge is now part of our family. And do you know another part of our family, which is our sister company, Nearpod? I just want to see how many of you are familiar with or using our assessment tools, and how many of you work with our sister company, Nearpod. So a couple seconds there, because I want to show you one more thing that is just super, super cool. And then we'll talk about emerging bilinguals. Couple seconds more in the poll. I think, Amanda, we should find how to have the Jeopardy theme song in the background so that people understand how many more seconds they have. You got the idea here.
Absolutely. And Jane, we do have just a quick question about the data that you showed earlier on.
Yeah, let me do the poll and then we'll take the data question.
Awesome.
All right, so let's take a look at the results here. And so you all can see most of you all are STAR users, though we have some FastBridge users in the room as well. And in terms of Nearpod, it's pretty close to 50-50, with just a little bit more percentage of the audience not being familiar with Nearpod than is. So Amanda, what was the question you wanted to deal with?
Yeah, it was a wonderful question brought in by Angela, and she was asking about the data that you showed previously and why was it dated from 2011?
Let me go back and make sure I understand which particular slide. Do you remember which one we were looking at?
Yep, it was towards the front. We were talking about reading growth.
It was the ear
Oh, the
research.
longitudinal study?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So that early childhood longitudinal database is not continually updated. So it was a massive sample. So it's a sister component to NAEP. So it was 2011 data. The actual analysis, if we're talking about the AIR one, that was just done about 2 years ago. So they're using an older data set to do that analysis. That's still very common. They just haven't updated that early childhood longitudinal study in a while. Also, too, nobody's been using any of the data sets for the last 3 years because of the obvious disruptions of the pandemic. So even some of the most cutting edge research there is right now, people have kind of cut off at the 2018, 2019 kind of time frame. And again, that question actually go back to AIR because they did the research. But I think it's just because that sample is huge. It's just a huge database, which I know there's, you say, well, 2011, have things changed? The size of that tends to wash out some of the changes that might occur because we weren't using like last year's data. Okay. So let's press on so that you are aware of one other tool I want to make sure you know about. And again, I want you to be up to date on what we're offering in terms of technology, because things are changing fast. Y'all followed the whole news there? Chat GPT. This piece of software just wrote a paper that got a passing grade in Harvard. Technology is moving quickly, and every day there's something new that allows us to do more in responding to kids' needs. So I want to make sure that you are aware of the STAR to Nearpod connection. Now, a little bit more than 50% of you said, I don't know what Nearpod is. Well, a picture's worth 1,000 words. If you go to nearpod.com, let me go over there, and I clicked the wrong button, so give me just a second to transfer. So here is my Nearpod login, and the great thing is there is a free version of Nearpod, and somehow I went to the wrong one. There we go. Oh, well, I'll just go here, Nearpod. So here's my Nearpod login. Nearpod is a library of content. that you can search by a topic or a standard. If you go to the Nearpod library link here, you see all kinds of things that are topical. So there's a lot for Black History Month because we're in that month right now. This changes as we make our way through here. There are a variety of publishers, some of which are Renaissance, some of which are our competitors. So if you use, for example, Cosmic Kids or Freckle or iCivics or Khan Academy, their resources are in here as well. Or you can drill in by grade levels or subjects. So let's see what's in here for first grade. I'm just drilling in randomly here. Here's an article on long AI, consonants and digraphs. These are all lessons that you can preview. They sometimes have virtual reality in there, so you can take kids to places and they can play and they can see. There's online interactive things for them to do. There's content, there can be videos, and there are questions and formative assessments embedded within them. So as you work through this lessons on consonant, digraph, SH, as you work through that at the very end, after your kids have done that, you can go to the reports tab and it will tell you how did your kids do on the activity in there. So you can see who answered the questions correctly, who did not. But let me close Nearpod for a second, because what I want you to understand is what could you do today, right now, this minute, at no additional cost, if you are a STAR user. Now, for our FastBridge users, we're working on this for you too. So it's going to take a while. So we're going to get there soon, but that's part of FastBridge coming into the family. Let me show you what can happen. Let's suppose I'm testing kids with either STAR reading or STAR literacy. It's going to behave the same way. I log in, I go to record book. This is where all the cool kids hang out. Like, this is the place to be, in the record book, okay? Because when you go into the record book, you're going to find this outstandingly awesome new button that says Plan Instruction with Nearpod. Now, I'm in a demo class, so right now you don't see any students. When you click record book, you're going to see your actual students listed here. Okay, so it'll look a little bit different there, but this button is what you're really looking for. Plan Instruction with Nearpod. When you choose that button, you're given some options. If you have groups created in your record book, you can plan instruction for a group. Of course, you have kids in your record book, so you can always click on a kid and plan for a kid. You can just click around on your own and browse skills. Or if you know you're looking for something like digraphs or fractions or exponents or whatever, you can type that in as a keyword search, okay? So whatever way you want to search, I'm just going to say browse just to show you what's in. Let's browse skills. We've been talking about the first couple of grades, so let's look at something at kindergarten or first grade. Let's go to first grade for a second here. I click first grade, and it's going to bring up first grade resources and standards. Here are particular skills that you're teaching, and here are Nearpod lessons to teach that skill. So for example, let's say I want to use blending phonemes. There's a good phonics topic there for you. Notice the lightning bolt, it lets you know that that is a focus skill. So if you are teaching blending of phonemes right now, here are 2 hand-picked lessons by our content experts, hand-picked lessons over in Nearpod that will help you teach the skill. Again, this is live right now, and you sign up for Nearpod for free. So if you're a STAR user, you can do this today. So I can go over and take a look at these lessons. Now, when I click on that, it does say, oh, timeout. You're about to leave. Well, you're not going to leave STAR. It's going to open a new window for you in a new place called Nearpod, where you'll be able to add this to your lessons, and you can distribute these things to an entire class or have kids do it one-on-one. It's just alerting to you that you're going to go somewhere else. So I say continue a new tab. It takes me over to Nearpod, where that lesson on the skill that I chose based on my STAR data is presented to me. I can preview the lesson by watching it and playing it. If I like the lesson and I want to use it with my kids, I press add to my lessons, okay? Once I press the add to my lessons button, I can go back to my own Nearpod folder. There it is, right there. I just added it. It just came in. Notice what happens when I hover over that tab. It says, do you want to do this as a live one? That would be me working through the whole class. Or do you want to do it as student-paced? You could make this homework or after school or over the night for kids. They'll do it on their own. Either way, and I can do it in front of, there's some different ways of presenting. So let's say I want to make it an activity that I'm going to do live with the kids. It will give you a code. The kids go to app.nearpod.com. They enter that code. They come in the lesson with you. They all see it on the screen while you're doing it. You walk the whole way through. And again, when the lesson is done, let me move this out of the way. When the lesson is done, whatever questions were embedded into that lesson, you'll see how kids did by going over to the reports tab. Okay. So these lessons are in here. You can put your own lessons in here, and you can even edit these lessons if you want to make a change to them. You can do that. That is the Start Nearpod collection, and it is available today. So I did that live. I want to skip through my screens here. I had them in there just in case we had problems with the internet, which we didn't, yay. But let me show you one other amazing thing. Let's suppose you did this lesson, and then when you went to that report tab at the end, you found that the kids did not do so well, okay? Well, notice under each skill, it also says prerequisite skills. So if you taught one of these lessons and in the report, you found that the kids did not do well, you can go back and press that prerequisite skills button and look what pops up. The prerequisite skills, not just the prerequisite skills, but also it comes up with more Nearpod lessons to teach those skills. So it's like backwards mapping. It says, okay, if they didn't do well, let's take one step back. Let's look at what they need and let's give them something in that space. You have been asking us for years to give you more information about prerequisite skills. Here it is in one click. And not only do you see the prerequisite skills here, but you're given Nearpod lessons that align with those skills. Also, too, if you go into Nearpod and you search publishers, you'll find La Lilo lessons there from Renaissance. You'll find Freckle lessons in there. If you use Mayan, it's in there as well. That is because Renaissance is deep into building an ecosystem where things connect. So STAR literacy scores can place kids into their starting point in La Lilo. FastBridge can now place into some of our products, and more placements are coming from there. We want our assessments to immediately place kids into our practice tools like La Lilo and Freckle, and then we want you to be able to use tools like our instructional platform Nearpod to facilitate the lessons that you would teach kids. Do you see it? It's all fitting together. Great assessments that point to great practice tools and save you time by giving you the starting place there, and that then have the instructional piece like Nearpod as well. And we didn't even get into the actionable insights, EduClimber, and that kind of stuff. That's another whole day. But those are the tools that I think you can use with any kid right now. But it gets us to the next point, which is, how well does this stuff carry over to emerging bilinguals? And for that, there is no better person than my colleague, Carol Johnson, who is just so wonderful in this space because she thinks about emerging bilinguals all day, every day. So Carol, what do we need to think? What do we need to know about kids who might not be learning to read just in English? They might be learning another language at the same time.
First of all, thank you. I love being here doing this, especially with Jean, because we all care so much about kids. And to get my part going, I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Going to pull up my slides for you. And I'm going to start right. Whoops, I'm going to back up right to there.
You're good. You got it now.
There we go. So I just am so excited to have this time with you today. So to answer this question, do these ideas carry directly over to these students? The answer is no, not directly. But I need to start by sharing with you that every single concept and even product that Jean talked about just before me beginning this part does relate to these kids. What I'm going to talk to you about is what are the other considerations you need to have when using our other products with emerging bilinguals. So that's where I'm going to take this today. Now, Jean showed you this slide already, and this slide refers to, as he said, native speakers of English. In my section, I'm talking about students who are not native speakers of English, who are emerging bilinguals, who are coming with maybe a little bit of English, depending on the household they grow up in, but some may be coming with almost no English. And that in itself changes this dynamic in terms of early literacy and foundational reading skills. The truth is, for students who come without much English, It's the language that is the issue if we're talking about foundational reading skills in English. And in this webinar, we have talked about only foundational reading skills in English. That's the focus of it. So here's what we rarely say out loud, but is true. The oral language proficiency when students come to school is one of the critical foundations of literacy. When we're talking about native speakers, we really don't have to say it out loud because it's a given. It's just true. But when we're talking about emerging bilinguals who come to us with little to no, perhaps English oral language, that's going to affect their development of foundational literacy skills in English. So, I went after the research concerning, oral language. What do we really mean? And I decided the most important thing I could focus on within that in this amount of time really was vocabulary. And so I went to the most recent research, and I want you to know this is research that comes from English-speaking countries around the world. So this is unique to English-speaking countries. And here's what that research says concerning vocabulary. It says that at age 1, children recognize about 50 words. When we say recognize, what do we mean? We mean when they hear it, they know what it means. By age 3, they recognize about 1,000 words, and by age 5, the typical native English-speaking child recognizes about 10,000 words. Now, that doesn't mean they're using them productively. It means they recognize them when they hear them. And that's the critical component we're going to tie to, in fact, the early literacy skills. And what do we need to know about language and how that affects it? So if I go back to Scarborough's rope, again, like Jean said, we're focusing this session on the word recognition session, the foundational literacy skills. But I want to break that down a little bit when we talk about emerging bilinguals and what does that mean? What do we mean when we say that? So if we talk those 3 components that are listed there in Scarborough's rope for word recognition, the first one is phonological awareness, which refers to the ability to manipulate individual sounds or phonemes in spoken words. Notice that's tied to oral language because oral language means listening and speaking. If we talk about decoding, we talk about that involving a series of smaller skills, such as taking apart the sounds in words, and linguists, we call that segmenting. And finally, if we talk about sight recognition, we mean words that a reader recognizes automatically without having to sound them out. Notice all 3 of those parts of word recognition in Scarborough's rope are directly tied to oral language ability or proficiency. So given that we have just a couple of minutes more together, what is the singular most impactful thing you can do then for your emerging bilinguals, noting that you have the same exact goal for them in foundational English literacy that as you do for native speakers? You can build oral language, but how do we help you do that? Oops, I have a poll. I don't know how to launch it, so one of my colleagues is going to do that for me.
I got you.
Thank you.
And you can probably see where Carol's going. We want to know, do you use Mayan currently in your district? Of course, Mayan is our digital platform for facilitating kids reading. So you get tens of thousands of digital books. Just want to kind of feel for how many of you may have that. And even if you have it, there's some things about it you might not realize. So just a couple seconds more on the poll. And Carol, I think I'll show the results in just a second. It's coming in about 1/3 of the audience. They are Mayan users. The other about 2/3 say, nope, they don't have it. So again, digital reading platform, thousands of digitally enhanced books for kids. So for a lot of kids, it's just immediate access to books. But I think we'll see that for emerging bilinguals, it could be something more.
Absolutely. So we can see exactly what Jean said. It says stop sharing. Can I get out of that myself? Yes, I can.
Just click on that.
Okay. All right. So what Jean said is absolutely true. For those of you that are familiar with Mayan, most people see it as a digital reading platform, and it absolutely is. Please make no mistake. But I want you to know that Mayan is actually used currently all over the world to build oral language. And that's because it actually facilitates and develops all of the 4 language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And when we're talking oral language, we're going to start with listening and speaking. So I have a screenshot here of from Mayan for you, where I went in and looked for books that would be appropriate to emergent readers. Okay, so very, very young students, right? And I want to show you how this is important for emerging bilinguals. Now, I just did that small amount of books intentionally so that it was manageable in the presentation, but I want you to see that it came up with 146 books for me. And I want you to know these books are mostly nonfiction. And the reason that's really important that I bring up these books that are nonfiction is because our emerging bilinguals acquire conversational skills fairly quickly, fairly easily. Our focus is to help them do better academically, to build, in fact, that academic language that they need. And so we really need some nonfiction books for that. And I've picked 3 of them to show you as examples. Just want you to see that. And I'm just going to look inside. So the first one I have is The Lion is in the Shade. Okay, notice that. The lion is in the shade. Why would I pick that? Why would I pick that? I pick that because this gives students the opportunity to both absolutely hear what's going on, learn and develop the oral language. And I picked this one to show you because the shade is a word that's really interesting across languages. Shade is, in fact, a word that an emergent bilingual, if just learning it by sight, could mispronounce it, could actually say shade. And we don't say it that way. Native speakers say shade. So I want you to know that the listening of this is really critical. Notice also, this is the opportunity to develop hearing sight words and high frequency vocabulary. So critical here. Followed by that is the opportunity, in fact, to record the voice. So notice this is both skills at the same time. This is listening and speaking. This is oral language development. And the student can record the voice, listen to it. You can listen to it too. All of that matters in terms of helping students develop the vocabulary necessary for the foundational skills to be successful when they've mastered them. Because the goal at the end of this is to take students from the foundational skills to comprehension. All right, I picked this slide particularly because, this book page, because notice the 3 words on here I want to point out to you. Just notice this. Some things move very slowly. That O is pronounced 3 different ways in 3 different words, all on one page. If you don't already know those words, when you start to decode, you are going to decode and get to a word that is meaningless. That's not what we're looking for students. This is how you help build their oral language using Mayan. This one I picked because we look closely at things. Things can be pronounced as tings by native Spanish speakers who are still learning English. That doesn't mean they don't know the word. That means they haven't yet developed the phonology underlying English. That's still in process. And Mayan can do this for your students. The truth about Mayan is it develops language. It's not just a reading platform. It's a wonderful reading platform. I don't want to misstate that. But it can develop language, and language develops, in fact, with the right input and enough input. It's got to be both. And it's just not possible for a classroom teacher realistically to do enough of that individually in a classroom, much less at the student's individual level. So I guess my question for you is, how can you move the needle? Because that's really what our goal is here, right? We're trying to help move the needle for students who are struggling. And in the case of our emerging bilinguals, seriously, we know that when you come to the classroom, thousands of words behind in English, where you're expected to achieve in English, we need a way to move the needle efficiently, effectively, based on research, all of that. And that's what Mayan will do for your students. Those are the references. Of course, you'll get all of that. And I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Jean.
And Carol's very modest. She said, and again, I think this is such a key point for Mayan users. You may not have thought about using Mayan with this particular group of kids, and there are different ways. There's different things you're going to do. Carol, just quick list of countries. Name the countries where you've been working. I mean, like this woman is up at like 2 a.m. to support Hungary. I forgot where. I gave her a bracelet one time that had like all the countries she went to. So
She did. He did.
What are the countries you've been working with?
China, Korea, Hungary, Turkey, all of the Latin American countries. I actually have today a webinar with Guatemala in between our webinars.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's all Mayan because they have learned how Mayan develops language. It's amazing.
And so the whole point is, for many of you, if you already have Mayan and you have emerging bilinguals, maybe all you need is an hour or so of remote training for someone to say, okay, let's put on that lens. Let's think about it that way. And again, for those of you that maybe don't have Mayan, but you've got massive numbers of kids, like Carol said, how could you move the needles? For those kids, it's oral input. And you can't read enough or say enough to these kids.
Not possible.
It's just not possible. So giving them a platform where the platform can read to them, this is a huge benefit for them, a significant move to the needle. So let's get ready to wrap up. We're talking about differentiation here. I want you to understand what is unique about the Renaissance approach, because there's a million companies out there telling you that they will differentiate. The unique part to Renaissance, Carol, if you want to click on that one for me. Oops. Oh, my
Sorry
bad.
about that.
I'll bring it up. It's fine. We were jointly sharing screens here.
Oh, yeah.
What we try to do always is keep the teacher at the center. What do we mean by that is you are deciding what programs, you are deciding what skills, you are deciding in what ways. We do not create programs that supplant the teacher. We do not create stuff that kids log onto in their cubicle and stay in all day long. And here's why. One, learning is social. Learning is social. You need to talk with others about what you're learning. And there is also no piece of technology out there that can do what a teacher does. So we don't create programs that take over the entire classroom. We create things that can assess, find the right areas, give opportunities for some kids to practice, maybe while they're working on Lalila or Freckle, while you're working with a small group that you created in STAR with a lesson that you found over in Nearpod that's being displayed to them, while other kids are working on their own self-paced lessons in Freckle or Lalila or Nearpod. We want this ecosystem of resources that you are in control of that allows you to take what's going on in your classroom and guide it in the masterful way that only a teacher can do. So not this, but something where the teacher is the center and the heartbeat of it all. That brings us to a poll that we'll kind of use to get ready to wrap ourselves up for today. And that question basically is, and I don't understand, I'm not seeing the launch button there. Amanda, can you try launching that poll? It's not letting me launch. So I'll get out of that and see if you can deploy it. And in the event that the poll does not come up, here's what we want to know. We want to know, what do you need follow-up on? So maybe if we don't get the poll, maybe you can respond in chat about what you would like to learn more about. Your options would be, do you want to learn more about Starphonics? You can just say Starphonics. We'll capture it. It'll have your names. Do you want to learn more about Lalila? Remember, I said there's a free version of Lalila. Okay. Actually, I think the poll may be coming up now. Let's go back. I'm going to get out of the poll. Are you still trying, Amanda?
I am.
Yeah. So let me go from the top again. Starphonics, you might want to know more about that. Lalila for that first practice piece that kids would have in literacy. Freckle, which is both ELA and math, and their science and social studies as well. Maybe you want to know more about that. Here it comes. There it is. Mayan as the digital library. Maybe you just want to know about what it is as a whole, or maybe you would like PD about how to use Mayan with emerging bilinguals, or maybe you already have STAR and you just like a little bit of hand-holding to have somebody walk you through that STAR to Nearpod connection, which is live right now and available free to you. Or maybe you'd like to have a copy of our What Kids Are Reading report when it's coming out, because that's just getting great books in front of kids. That'll be out very, very soon. Or maybe you're saying, nothing at this time, I'm good. And that's totally fine too. Because here's what I believe about personalization. We're not just going to throw the switch and like transform the whole world. My question to you is, what's the next step? What is the one thing that you could add to your classroom that would move the needle? Carol showed you that move the needle. That's the question for us. And that's all I would ever ask of my teachers when I was administrator. What's the one new thing you can do? I don't want you to do 5 new things. You'll get overwhelmed. You'll crash back down to where you were. I want you to say, what is one thing that I could do differently? And then just work on that one for a while until it becomes folded into what we do every day. And once it becomes second nature to us, then we can add something else from there. We will gradually move the needle. But again, my belief is the factory model never existed. Teachers always wanted to respond, but time just runs out on us. We're trying to save you time, make connections that fit together, give you tools that are smart and dynamic and integrated. And again, if you use Starly Literacy, it'll place your kids in La Lilo. If you use STAR products, it'll place your kids into Freckle and other things. FastBridge now has placement into some of our practice tools, and it all fits together in Nearpod. Nearpod's got everything. It's got all of the Renaissance content. It's probably got your own curriculum out there as well. We want smart tools that fit together, that save you time, that do the paperwork, so you can do more of the magical stuff that teachers have to do, which is sitting down with a kid and getting through to them. That's when the needle will really get moved. With that, I think we are at time. We'll remain on. If there's any questions we want to deal with and chat with, we will, but we want to respect your time. Thank you for the little emojis that are popping up. I love those. We appreciate your feedback. We hope you found some useful ideas here. So we'll just pause for a minute. I'll check in with Amanda and Alina and see if there's anything in chat that we want to answer. We'll leave the poll open. If you need to go, please excuse yourself. Otherwise, we'll hang on and just make sure that any of the questions need to be answered.
We have no questions in the chat. I think we got everything pretty much.
I see Wendy had a comment that she says, I've got some teachers, secondary teachers using Freckle. Okay, so yeah, we'll follow up on that, Wendy, about the connection there. Also, too, I mentioned it so that everybody knows, when Freckle was purchased, we began first by finishing out the math content. Math content now goes through Algebra 2. Our top priority now is adding more English language arts. So a massive amount of English language arts has been added, and another massive amount is coming. So expanding the ELA offerings in Freckle is a top priority. It's got so much more now, and even more is coming. So you're going to see more and more things coming into there. So we'll follow up with you on that. Just kind of get you the connections there from Star over to Freckle. And again, be watching that one, because you're going to see more and more English language arts coming in. A lot of new skill areas too, a whole new vocabulary kind of thing, and a lot of skills that just weren't covered before. They're all there. Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate the feedback. See a few more little floating emojis there, some thumbs up, and even some hearts. The Valentine's Day was yesterday, but I'll take a heart today too as well. All right, with that, we'll get ready to wrap up here. Thank you all. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Alina. Thank everybody for attending. We appreciate your time this morning. And again, we hope we give you some insights, and we look forward to working with you as we all move the needle and respond to what it is that kids need. Thanks.
Thank you.